This might be a long post. I know we're not supposed to moan about story length, but just a heads up. I've told this many times before, and I've seen it condense as a result. I'll try and return it to the full length as best as I can. Another forward is that this is still going on. It's just that many choices have been made since that have resulted in a much calmer atmosphere. She's still the crazy, delusional woman she's always been, though. I just have more distance from her. So the scene is summer of 2010. I had just finished primary school. For you non-Brits, it's the place you leave when you're 10, before high school. And I was ready to start this summer. Summers when you're 10 or younger are typical, maybe a holiday. We weren't and still aren't the most well-off family there is, so holidays were something to look forward to and enjoy as much as possible. Some sleepovers and maybe a theme park visit. Apart from that, it just meant waking up whenever and watching TV, anything. I remember, being the inquisitive kid I was, I loved imagining. Being imaginative means that you're sometimes a little nosy. I distinctly remember walking into my dad's studio, he's a musician in a rock band, and seeing a ring on the table. At the time, I didn't think anything of it, until I mentioned it to a friend who was a little more concerned. They said my parents might split up. I was a little more on edge after that conversation, but the summer went ahead as normal. I remember finding a book in the kitchen titled Ways to Save Your Marriage, or something like that. Again, I just thought my parents were working something out. My mom was in the conservatory, and I went over to talk to her. I remember the conversation like it was yesterday. "Are you and Dad splitting up?" "Yes." It's simple, I know, but above all, I remember the environment. I was looking out of the window into our back garden near the hut where we kept our guinea pigs. I remember turning to face my mom when she said yes, and just having this look of utter shock on my face. Being the overly dramatic 10-year-old I was, I threatened to run away into the valley, which is a huge forest behind our house, and stuff like that. I got some paper and pretended I was going to write a book about how sad I was. I loved the attention, but I was heartbroken at the same time, not a good mix. The worst part was that I was starting high school in a few weeks' time. You might think, oh, that's okay, you'd have friends to help you through it. Nope. I was moving to a new high school with only 2 people from my primary school going with me. 2 girls who I'd never really spoken to or had any friendship with. I felt utterly alone. High school started in September of 2010. By that point, my dad had moved out and gone to live in a flat somewhere miles away. I can't remember exactly where it was. I remember crying all the time and having my mom comfort me. I wasn't, and still am not, one of the tough lads who plays footy and drinks, etc., etc. I'm a musician and a programmer, and as a result got a lot of shit over the years for expressing myself in music, a couple YouTube channels I have, and overall being a little reclusive. So this didn't really help with the situation at home. Whenever possible, I went to see my dad. He had bought himself a flat. You'd walk into this small hallway, and his was on the left. There was another on the right, and a staircase that went upstairs to a few more places. The apartment was really nice on first glance. There was a fireplace, a large window that looked out onto the road, and a TV, which my dad had hooked his computer up to. There was also an upstairs area with a bedroom and a bathroom, a king-size bed or something. It wasn't until I went to stay over a few times that the main issue kicked in. It was freezing. We dragged a heater next to us and played a board game once and still shivered constantly. Sleeping was better, but still freezing cold. Above all was a constant feeling of something being off. You could never settle properly because you felt so uncomfortable. One day, the roof in the next apartment burst open. The people who lived there had moved out a few days earlier. My dad wanted to leave after that. When he moved out, he learned that he was either the only person living in the building or there was another person who was hardly ever there. Once, we even had to venture down into the basement when the power cut out. The landlord couldn't come over, so he told my dad to do it. It was almost pitch black. When we were down there, we realized that there was a back door that was being kept shut by a chair leaning against it. Anyone could have given that door a little nudge and they would have been straight in. So my dad moved out. He'd been seeing someone for months, Sue, and she seemed really nice at first. My dad quite suddenly moved in with her and married her, and that's when all the shit started. I remember getting an email telling me that I had to come see her or something to that extent. I didn't want to see her, but the condition set forward was that I had to see her in order to see my dad. This left me distraught, but I eventually gave in. They pulled up one night with my stepbrother Matt in the back seat. Matt was around 9 years old at the time. He was the nicest kid ever, which makes looking back on all this even more painful and angering. Turns out, Matt never saw his dad. Sue barred Matt from seeing him, so he instantly took a liking to my dad. Eventually, he started calling him Dad, too. Their house was small, and a spare room had been thrown around into a small room for me. For months, I'd see my dad for a few hours, usually stay for the night, and then go back the next day. I was fine with this. Seeing my dad made up for the fact that Sue was there, too. Something about Sue was off. The same feeling from the flat Dad had. She was nice, but in a somewhat sinister way. She'd randomly offer to make me some food at 10 at night. I'd start playing music, and she'd run in, turn up the volume, and start jumping around all hyper. She'd sit with bottles of wine and just drink for hours, sometimes days on end. She'd go without sleep. She'd sleep without waking up. She was absolutely the most insane woman I'd ever met. I thought she was at least tolerable until one night. My dad had gone with his band to play a gig somewhere. I was alone with Matt, Sue, and Sue's friend, Faye. Sue had the hilarious idea to watch a horror film. Now, I love horror films, but seeing her suddenly jump up and declare that we were watching one was weird and, quite frankly, jarring. I suggested Saw to shut her up, but she said, and this was funny at the time, "If you want to watch a baby film, that's fine by me," or something like that. We laughed for a bit, but then Sue sent Matt upstairs to go to bed. He was too young for something like Saw. Faye was really nice. I'd made some trading cards for monsters that I'd made up on some website. I was going through them, sometimes printing them off and making little games with them, and she would usually join in, or at least be interested. Faye seemed almost totally on my side. What I mean by that is, whenever Sue kicked off, Faye would usually defend me in some way. This was no exception. Sue randomly came in and dumped a huge box of pictures from when her son Anthony was in the army. She also went through some pictures of another son of hers, Ross, and Matt too. This went on for a bit, but then, and this was one of the many jarring things about her, she randomly stood up and exclaimed, "Right! Film in 10 minutes!" and turned the TV on. I went to a random number generator to see which Saw film we'd watch, and 4 came up. These details are precise because I wrote down what happened that night in case I had to, provide it as evidence. One time, at Dad's old flat, we had watched the first Paranormal Activity movie. I was a bit spooked by some bits, as I was 10 years old when we'd watched it. She suddenly brought that up, saying now we couldn't watch Saw. I protested, and she got angry. She suddenly said that all her children have tried it out on her, and I was getting upset. She'd obviously been drinking or was just off on some weird mood swing because she pointed to the door and told me to go to bed. I made out that the evening was becoming unfair, and she said, "I'm telling you as your stepmother, go to bed." I was crying by this point, but Faye came with me. Sue came barreling up the stairs with her phone in her hand. She told me that it was my dad, and he wanted to speak with me. Faye protested, saying that I didn't want to talk, but Sue pushed past her and shoved the phone in my face. I pushed it away, and Sue said, "Stop hitting me!" At this point, you might see what kind of person she is, a disgusting, compulsive liar. I took the phone, and Dad told me to go apologize right then and there, to take myself downstairs and say I was sorry, so I did. Dad said I should say I'm sorry, so I'm sorry, or something like that. Well, she didn't like that. I apologized to Faye on the way past, and she said I shouldn't be sorry, Sue was being unfair. Sue came running up the stairs again, and Dad, over the phone, told me that I shouldn't have said Dad said I should, or whatever it was. Dad would be home soon, so I was a bit scared. I said something stupid like, "I'm scared of being hurt," and she went downstairs. A little while later, Sue was heard pacing up and down the downstairs corridor. I heard her say, "Idiot!" I wondered what had happened. Did she break something? Was she shouting at the TV? No, that wasn't it. "You fucking asshole, you piece of shit! You better pray your father still fucking loves you!" I heard Sue and Faye arguing too. Sue shouted again, "Anyone who puts my husband down is out! They are out! Never set foot in this house again, you fucking idiot, you piece of shit!" Dad walked through the door. Sue must have said something like, "You're fucking prick of a son," because Dad went ballistic. You, a mother, using language like that about my son? At this point, my dad was the best person in the world to me. He came upstairs, turned on the light, and told me in an unexpectedly calm tone, "Pack your bags." I shoved everything into whatever cases I had brought and made my way downstairs. As I was walking towards the door, Sue was leaning in the doorway shouting, "Well done, kid! You got what you wanted! Well done! I hope you're fucking happy!" Dad pushed her back, shouting, "Back off! Back off!" to her. He told me to sit in the car. Stu slammed the door and Dad got into the car. We drove for ages. Dad kept stopping the car because Stu kept calling him. He had to get out, answer it, and get back in, and then carry on driving. The initial plan was to take me home. After it became evident that it would be a ridiculously long trip back home, what with the calls and stuff, Dad made the somewhat crazy move to go back there. We both went back. It was like 3 or 4 in the morning, so I went to sleep pretty quickly. Still, I was terrified. In the morning, I left with Dad and got back home safely. When I told my mom about what happened, it turned out Dad only knew half the story concerning the events leading up to the Outburst. My dad says he's never forgotten about that and would never forgive her for it.